everyone. Welcome to our panel on real-world data. We have an amazing panel of speakers here who are data scientists, researchers, and experts in this field. So if we could start with Ayako and just give your name and some background information about yourself.
My name is Ayako Monsell. I am a data scientist with the team here. My background is actually public health data related, a lot of statistical analysis, programming, open data, survey information. And so just doing my best to bring some of what I've done in the past that I've really, enjoyed doing to what I love doing all the time, which is cannabis. So I'm really happy to be a part.
Marné?
Hello, my name is Marné Garretson. I am an epidemiologist by training. I have worked across therapeutic areas, including infectious diseases, neurology, psychology, and most recently in oncology. And so I have also been a medical cannabis patient for most of my life. And it's really been an honor to blend both my passion and professional skill set to really articulate the value of real-world data and pass it to Tyler.
My name is Tyler Dautrich. I am the COO at More Better. A lot less smarter than everybody else up on this panel here, but my company is a software and data and research company. So we use provide the software with everybody up here to collect real world data, specifically on people's use and experience with a specific product based on specific reasons that they're using that product for.
So one of the things that's so cool. I'm Dr. Miyabi Shields. So Dr. Kirk and myself, we are pharmaceutical scientists. We are biochemists, and this team here has really helped us to take what we do and what we study at the atomic scale and really understand what is the impact of what you're doing when you do biochemistry, when you do analytical chemistry. Like, yes, there's going to be a lot of assumptions, there's a lot of extrapolations, there's a lot of that, but there's also ways in which we can investigate how this is working for all of us right now and use that information in really important ways. So are we ready for the first question?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good point of just studying complex natural products in the human body is very, very difficult. And we don't have a cell-based model or a lab-based model that can capture that complexity. So let's ask the millions of people that are consuming cannabis every single day and respect their experience and then share it back so more people can learn.
Yeah.
So I think we'll start with Marné and we're going to ask a question. Collecting real-world data is very different than the traditional clinical model of collecting data. Can you explain maybe some of the shortcomings of clinical research, especially with natural products like cannabis, and how real-world data helps to fill those gaps?
Yes. So real-world data is real and positioned well to answer questions that cannot be really studied well in an isolated environment like clinical trials. And so essentially real-world data is research and consumption of information that's collected in routine clinical settings and naturalistic settings as well. And so there's an opportunity for us to collect lived experience data from consumers who are either consuming daily or as they choose to understand how that product that they're using is benefiting them and to understand the safety and efficacy of the product, but also to translate the insight and value of how they're choosing to medicate and change the perspective of the clinical research establishment trying to demonize the value of this plant or coming from it from a addiction focus rather than a harm reduction and the net clinical health benefit that it can provide. And I think there is also an opportunity that most recently regulators are starting to articulate and advocate for the value of real-world evidence in the traditional pharmaceutical clinical development pipeline. Most recently in oncology as well, there's been a real paradigm shift. And so I do want to remain hopeful that there will be buy-in and encourage folks to also ultimately participate and join these studies and champion themselves as citizen scientists to take control of their information and data and advocate for how it's shared and used.
Yeah, I feel like it's very clear that there is a shift to people realizing that the way that we have been doing things is been beneficial. We've gained a ton of knowledge. We have made a lot of huge discoveries, while at the same time, it being a very limited way of us approaching how medicine really can be. And in order to overcome that, we're going to need new ways of taking this data and new ways of understanding it, because while the clinical setting is valuable, and absolutely none of us are out here arguing that the clinical setting should go away.
But when was the last time you read a paper and said, wow, I really resonate with that peer-reviewed study?
And when's the last time that you went into a doctor's office and felt like you did in your living room when you were having an issue or having something that maybe would be causing a chronic issue? So we want to take data just in your home setting. We want to learn about patterns of use that are typical within all the variability that happens in everyday life. So Tyler, will you talk a little bit about how longitudinal data and how the software and how we take data over time and how there's a benefit there for how we can capture different pieces of the experience?
Yeah, for sure. And just to back up real quick, to piggyback off of something Marné said too around the legitimacy of this, and you're starting to see more of a call to action from government officials and or medical healthcare professionals for this. The FDA within the past couple of years actually came out and made a couple announcements and a couple of statements and actually put out a couple guidance documents or white papers, whatever you want to call it, around the need for real world data and the need for real world evidence and collecting real world data the right way so that it can lead to real world evidence. And I think what kickstarted that significantly was obviously COVID. You couldn't really travel to a clinical study setting during the COVID pandemic. So it was like, how does research still continue? And that's when the legitimacy and credibility of real world data and real world evidence really skyrocketed. And I think to your point, I think there is hope that that's going to be more incorporated into not only these alternative therapies or medicines like cannabis, like what we're talking about here, but in the more traditional healthcare pharmaceutical setting, which will be interesting to just see how that kind of shapes and evolves over time. But to your question, Miyabi, so how we do it. So the easiest way to think about it is, again, you want to look at real world data collection so that it can be used for real world evidence. The importance with collecting real world data is making sure that you collect it in a structure that it can be used for regulatory and or research evaluation purposes, and not just collecting like one-off survey answers. So from my company, the way we look at real world data is you have what Marné explained is like the gold standard clinical model, which again, we don't want to replace that, and there's a need for that. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there's product reviews. So there's a massive gap in between product reviews and clinical data. And in all of these alternative health and wellness categories, cannabis, all these other ones that are emerging, there's thousands, millions of people using these products every single day to help improve their quality of life. Again, whether that's sleep, pain, more specific medical conditions, whatever, there's people who are using these products daily that they're having lived experiences every single day, that if structured correctly, there could be data collected daily, weekly on those lived experiences that we can put into something that looks similar to like an observational study and start to understand impact, effects, et cetera, that, yeah, they might not have the exact apples to apples comparison of what a clinical research study would, but it's going to give us a lot more insight than what we have right now. And it might save time and money for those in the clinical research space. Well, if there's validated data over here that we collected in a real world setting that's using validated assessment tools or validated questionnaires, that's giving us an insight or shining a flashlight onto what may or may not be happening, we can spend a lot more efficient time and money over here in the clinical space to really understand what do we need to further validate or invalidate. So I think that's at least how our company, my company, has been viewing this space and how we see real world data being able to streamline research for patients and consumers who just they need answers now because they're using these products now, but also add value to the traditional gold standard model that isn't going to go anywhere and should stay in place too in most cases.
Something is better than nothing. Something is always better than nothing. And right now, everything's evolving so rapidly on a state-by-state basis that it really does make sense to have an ulterior method or just another method of getting information out there that would be additional to it. And I mean, we've already started doing it. So,
yeah, and one of the challenges with longitudinal data, it is so valuable, especially because people's dosing changes whether, they're on their period or not, they're having a bad pain day or not. All of these different things are fluctuating in our lives, and our dosing is going to change as well. So we have with longitudinal data sets, we usually take about 2 weeks of data, and we are asking people questions every single day. Ayako, as a data scientist who is working with this huge set of data that we've collected, what are some of the challenges of dealing with that much data compared to something like a survey that might be a little quicker to deal with, but maybe less in depth?
Well, it definitely depends on the survey, right? You're talking about, this is because it's over 14 days and you're talking about all these data points, right? You're looking at, over 6 million data points in this data set that you've collected with the team. And just that alone takes its own time to figure out what's in it, what's being represented, to be able to remove things that aren't necessary or aren't working, to be able to then use what we know about survey information to apply it to the data set that we have here, right? To be able to parse that information as effectively as possible, but also understanding that we're dealing with huge data sets, right? Crashing software, crashing servers and everything is a real concern when we're talking about using software that is either accessible or, available in a academic setting, something that's still considered kind of gold standard, right, in terms of programming or the analysis that's retrieved from it. So it's figuring out how to put all those pieces together and then actually review the information and be able to share it with everybody else.
One thing I'd like to add to that too, the value of longitudinal data is that if it's structured the right way, you can use it to identify statistically significant changes, where in a survey you can't do that. It's just like, Miyabi, I'm going to ask you a yes or no question. Give me your yes or no answer. And that's Miyabi's opinion in that particular setting.
I was so ready. I was just so ready. I was like, you put him on the spot here. Like, ask me a question. Okay.
But in a longitudinal data setting, you can measure those responses over time, and you can get to a point where someone like Ayako, who knows way more than I do about how to do the actual data science, can come out and say these changes or impacts were statistically significant or not, which essentially allows some more credibility and validity when you start to make public statements about it, where the statistically significant changes or impacts isn't something that's happening by chance. There's a high degree of likelihood that event or change will continue to happen, rather than, again, asking like the five of us up here our opinions on something. Our opinions might change tomorrow ourselves, or all of us might have very different opinions. So like, what are any of you going to take away from that when you hear 5 different opinions that may change tomorrow, versus seeing something like, oh, okay, this was collected over a 2 to 4 week period of time, and there's some statistical significance behind these outcomes and these results.
I also want to add that I think a lot of people would think that stoners were really bad at completing surveys, but we have a pretty high compliance rate for actually finishing the study. And I think that means a lot for people wanting to be involved in this research and wanting to really push ahead cannabis research to make it more valid and to use it as advocacy to represent our community and show that we are legit and we're using this as medicine and we know how to dose and we know our body. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that people are finishing the study.
Yeah, I just want to shout out everyone who's participated in any of our research or followed any of our research because when I have presented this research in like more traditional spaces, like a pharmaceutical space, people are very shocked. Other scientists who do real world data are very shocked at how passionate and how dedicated this community is, how much this community cares about the medicine and understanding the medicine at a deeper level.
And how educated people
are, how self-educated and how self-determined our community is about this medicine. I mean, it shocks people in the other spaces of medicine because the compliance rate and the way that you all engage with what we do because we want to be a part of it and we want to have a say in it. It's uncanny, and I want to give a huge shout out because we would not be here without people who want to be part of something different and who see that there's a value in recording the good things and in recording everything, really, because you're never going to be able to look back upon data that you never collected in the first place. We're missing that opportunity every day that we don't.
I was just going to say, to that point, it's obvious probably for all of us too, but like, cannabis started as a grassroots community-based movement. Like it was something that you had to get educated based on peer-to-peer experience.
Cannabis started as the earth.
But okay, I should say the legalization movement and the bringing medical opportunities to the forefront started from a community advocate pushed thing. So it just makes sense that like if you can organize that they're going to want, the people are going to want to do that because they're already doing it amongst peer groups. So like if we can organize it and show like this is going to amplify what's already been happening, again, it makes sense to all of us up here, but I think it's just an interesting point to what you said.
And I think a big part of that too is sharing it back with the community because it's not like with every study that we do, we can offer you $200 for participating. Yeah. You know, we don't even get to pay $200 for it. So
Stop there.
So we can't offer that, but what people do find value in is we want to share that data back with you. You provided that to us. You took the time to do that every day for 2 weeks. So then we want to take the time to analyze that data, make it digestible, and share it back with you. So then you can share it with your friends, your family, you know, your parents, and show them that this data exists out here and that you're actually part of it. And that's a really beautiful thing.
Well, we might get into this, but to go back to what Marné was saying in the traditional clinical setting too, is I think that's one of the benefits in a space like cannabis versus the traditional clinical route is just the speed in which results can be collected and shared. Like it takes, you could probably speak more to this, but like decades for a clinical result to come out and then it's in a white paper or a peer-reviewed study. Like you said, when's the last time you read that and said it resonates with me or even understood it? Where with real world data collected the right way, again, just like the speed to implementation, the speed to results, and the speed to promoting that is just like exponentially faster.
Let's talk about those timelines.
I was just going to ask Marné. So I think this is an example because I actually don't know the answer to this. How long did it take for that study that we published together, that you and Riley published together? How long was the timeline of that study from start to finish?
I would say it took 18 months really to set up the study, to go through the IRB process, then to work on the field, to launch the questionnaires, test them, analyze that data, and then after we finish that step, to sit back and collaborate and figure out the most salient insights to actually publish and what type of evidence generation gap we could position ourselves to fill. And that does speak to the traditional research process, but I do think that there's opportunities for us to leverage data that can be captured on the go with wearable devices or data that can be entered continuously and updated continuously to reflect long-term trends. And, you know, there's a perspective where we can analyze data cross-sectionally, where we can capture a lived experience in one moment in time, but it's hard to generate data that is replicable, that is recognized by regulatory officials based off of a cross-section. And so I think that there's opportunities to build registries of data where individuals are positioning themselves to not only focus on capturing their experience for one specific therapeutic condition, but just how they are using this plant and how they exist. And so I think that there's an opportunity for us to continuously advocate for research participation in that way and apply health equity frameworks, apply community-based participatory research models as well.
Can you say just a little bit more about health equity and research and how it is one thing about lived experience that is valuable is that historically when we do look at research and what evidence we do have and we have been collecting, how there's a population skew. So can you speak a little bit more to how health equity and how lived experience can affect that?
Yeah, well, I think it's necessary to apply health equity frameworks to really shift the power back to communities that have been intentionally marginalized and oppressed and excluded from not only just traditional models of research, but political policies and making sure that their experience is centered in how their data will be used. I think we are well positioned to make sure that we create that pathway to honor citizen science in that way. And I do think that oftentimes we can recognize and fixate on the systems in place that are meant to discourage us in our voice and kind of allow that stigma and shame to really forfeit our ability to fight and continue to stand in the forefront and know that I'm not afraid to admit that I'm using this plant every day or using it to treat this condition, or this is how I'm actually able to care for my kids or show up as a better daughter, et cetera, husband. And so I think real world evidence in general has the ability to serve as a tool to repair the fissures and the cracks of traditional lenses of clinical research where marginalized communities have been exploited, where their data has been extracted with their consent or without their consent and used to oppress them. And that was not the actual purpose of the reason why the scientific method should be applied to investigate these research questions. And so I think we can shift the power back to ourselves, to the community, and inform the development of these pipelines to leverage the research and development that is ultimately going to bring this plant to more people.
And I love that you mentioned some of those endpoints that we wouldn't know to look for unless we were cannabis consumers, you know, because that is really important for cannabis consumers to be designing these data sets and to be asking the right questions. Because if somebody never interacted with people that use this plant or the plant, they might ask questions that they're used to asking in clinical settings, but it's really not capturing the nuance of data that we're looking for from the cannabis community.
Absolutely.
And
I feel like the thing that really sums it up for me is a saying that comes from the disability rights advocacy movement, and it's nothing about us without us. And it is exactly what it sounds like, which is that nothing should be done in research and in medical and in government frameworks. Nothing should be done about us without us. We should have representation from the community of people that utilize this medicine. We should have representation of the known and lived experience and knowledge that all of us accumulate over time, because our community has always been one of oral tradition. Oral tradition also historically is the way that humans have always conveyed our histories through story. And we have that as a community. We will never lose that. And that's just a fraction of the extra knowledge that you gain from being a daily consumer. It's just a fraction of the extra context that you have that in everything, because this is about, when we talk about research, medicine, and government policies, we're talking about the systems that define how we're allowed to live our lives. And if we don't have the representation to even be a respected seat at that table, we're not going to be able to have a say, or we will have a much more difficult time, and have had a much more difficult time in being able to have a say in doing that. So one of the things we want to do and that we love to do is using science as advocacy. This data set and anyone who has participated in this longitudinal data set is part of our science advocacy campaign. We are going to be speaking with the Weird Brains at the end of the day here later about how that's been this year. But in a nutshell of it, it's that collecting information from the community and giving information back to the community is helping us in both ways. We are also receiving so much more information and so much more lived experience, and would never have been able to have that information or have our research be driven by the impact of the community in another way. It's changed both of our research careers fundamentally.
Well, let's talk about some of the findings that maybe surprised us with that first study. I'll start with one, and then any of us here can talk about that. One of the most shocking ones that I thought, but something we already kind of hypothesized, was 16% of people can't feel edibles. That's a really, really high number. They can't feel edibles at all. If this was any other medicine and over 15% of people couldn't feel the effects of that product type, we would immediately be studying it. That is very relevant for medical dosing. But in our community, we haven't studied that yet because we never had that data published ever. So we're about to publish that for the first time, and we're hoping to do follow-up studies to start to learn more and say, is there a way to formulate around this? So maybe people could feel edibles who currently cannot, but if we add different active ingredients and ways to kind of get around some processes in the body, maybe they can feel edibles, and maybe we can get around that. But we haven't even known to study that yet until this data set was out. So that's one of the
I think this is a really good example of how limited sometimes the standard approach to things can be, because we actually first stumbled upon this now almost 4 years ago.
From TikTok.
On TikTok, yes, because both of us had made videos about edibles. And the comments were just slammed with people being like, yo, I can't feel these, help me.
Yeah, or I wish I could feel edibles. Yes. I can take a whole gram of THC and feel nothing.
And then, and then obviously all the other comments being like, oh, you didn't decarb correctly, this just wasn't created properly. Oh, you have to go 50 milligrams no matter what, which some people do. Some people absolutely.
But the other end of that too is I receive messages that, saying, hey, some people are taking a gram of THC and not feeling anything, so you don't feel edibles. And they said, I stopped doing that and I stopped getting headaches. Taking that much THC was giving me a headache, but I didn't feel the psychoactive effects. So they stopped doing that. And help their headaches.
The fact that happened, we were both like, that was really strange. Like, and then that happened to be when the ICRS, the International Cannabinoid Research Society, did their annual symposium, and it was virtual. It was half virtual and hybrid, so I was able to attend. And I was in a room with all the other research scientists that are on the globe that research the plant, the phytocannabinoid. It was the phytocannabinoid subdivision of this group. And, raised my hand and was just like, are people aware that a significant number of people can't feel edibles? And like the research room was dead silent. I mean, it was crickets, right? Like no one, anything. Now, a medical doctor from Connecticut raised his hand and said, hey, I actually came to this just to listen. I'm a medical doctor. I have patients out in Connecticut. I must have had like 1,000 patients or so. And he said, I would estimate it's about 20%. And we were like, let's make a TikTok. Let's make a TikTok about it. I think within 48 hours of TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, and LinkedIn, we had over 20,000 responses. Yeah. And they ranged from 18 to 21%. And in our longitudinal data set, which is a much more, as we were describing earlier, a much closer to clinical, a non-clinical, but a much more controlled and rigid study, it was 16%. And so this is a known thing. And we actually tried to publish that when we found the data on social media, and they told us that data wasn't real. They said that data wasn't real enough. And now it has taken us the time to get the data in a way that we can package it so that we can use it in the language that they have to understand.
Do you guys want to discuss any of the data from the data set as well?
Well, what I think just kept being echoed in every space, right, and everybody's conversation is the representation, right? Mm-hmm. And so not only are we talking about representation of what, we're doing on a regular basis, but we get to see that in information that we're typically not represented in. Right. And so there's this huge value in being able to really see yourself in it. And so seeing that there's a large population of queer and neurodivergent individuals using cannabis, right? You're also talking about, just like you said, the amount of people who actually completed the study, right? So getting good numbers of information to where you're actually able to put some confidence in that in that result. And close to 3,000 results at, more than 10 days of a 14-day study is huge. Mm-hmm. You're not going to see that kind of feedback on a regular study. Like a national survey study. You're nowhere near that kind of results. So
can I just add that it was 50% queer and 71% neurodivergent. Like that is it, and 91% daily consumers. Yeah. So this is an intersection that is fairly well established, and I think it is really important and really impactful to not just see yourself in the data, but also to understand what our population, who benefits from cannabis and why, and how that's part of our lives. So, Marné, what was your favorite part of the data?
Well, I think it was also just recognizing that a majority of the patient sample reported being daily consumers. And I think it was validating to not only see that overrepresentation, but to know, we do have to consider the limitations of how our court is really constructed. It is a convenient sample, and so we can sit and understand the actual context of how this information is being collected, but know that we can use this information to take the next step, to really have a call to action and how we are showing up and accessing healthcare in the traditional system, or even sharing knowledge with our friends, or wanting to actually pave the way and wanting to be on the forefront of this type of research. And so I do think it's important to understand that we are trying to generate this data that is still valuable, that is still rigorous and quality information, but we have to work within the confines of our community sample. And so that is where I want to continue to iterate the value of participation and really wanting to volunteer your information and hold us accountable, and other institutions and organizations that are using this information to share that feedback back to you. And so I think that's really critical, where we here are trying to close that gap and empower folks to take the next step and be accountable to how their information is being collected and shared.
And it was 91% of people were daily cannabis consumers out of that study of almost 5,000 people.
Mm-hmm. So 64% consumed before noon.
So, and as Marné is saying, like, yes, this data set is absolutely, biased because of the way we collected, but at the same time, we've never been represented in cannabis research or in research in general because we've never trusted the people doing the research. So, for the first time, we actually have daily stoners saying, "Okay, I'll take your study, I'll complete this research," because they know that we're not going to do anything with that data to, potentially compromise their safety or the safety of the cannabis community, because you can't just trust any researcher out there because that data can be manipulated. After you're done presenting that research, like when it's being written up, you don't know unless you know the researchers and you trust those researchers.
I think it's absolutely comical that anyone would consider a bias of self-selecting for the stoner population, which they do. I understand why. But I think it's comical and hilarious and also ironic that people could consider that bias when there's clearly a bias in other existing research that has there too. It is never unbiased. It's never not selected. And when we have been studied in the past, it's been as people who are ill. It has been as people who have a pathology. It's been as sick people who need help, who need curing, who need to be changed. It's about people who are not good for society and need to be changed so that they're better for society. And I think that lens of being studied, there's an argument to be made here that no single survey that's ever been done on cannabis that hasn't been done from our community doesn't have an element of bias in it, where the people who are participating, like I can be a perfect example. In college, I was part of an athletes study on binge alcoholism, I think, and all substances. But it was a survey-based study that we took every year that we were an athlete. And they asked about all sorts of our use patterns, yes. And you better believe that when I was on scholarship, I was clicking no for every single one of those things.
Or people who go to the doctor right now, people ask if we smoke or how much we smoke. I'm not being honest still, and
I'm not.
And if you are honest, you are running the risk. Sorry, what was that?
On those forums, we were just joking about how we don't report that we do smoke. Yeah.
And we can't. I mean, you can, sure, but like I get searched for track marks often because of what I look like, let alone like being like, hey, like I'm also out here smoking every day in the morning with 64%
I'm high right now. Where's that box?
I'm actually ready to titrate soon. 15.
I do want to ask Marné a question, because in our real world data set, we did come across some answers that were clearly questions that people are trying to sabotage, answering. You could tell even by the email people were using that they were not trying to actually contribute to our research. So when we deal with something like this, if someone's being, racist or very, very mean, like how do we deal with that data when we're analyzing it and preparing it for publication?
Well, I think there is an ethical responsibility to make sure that our information remains to represent robust and quality experiences. And so I think that we go back and forth and discuss strategies to systematically recognize patterns where there is discrete information that is a flag for any type of derogatory comments or clearly inputted data that is false, whether that is them putting 99, as a response option and we're looking for responses under 10, things that we can validate the responses, because there are boundaries where we want to adhere to ensuring that we are protecting the safety of individuals who are wanting to come to us to share their information and research, but also hearing this feedback being shared in an environment and in a setting that respects each and everyone's lived experience. And so I think that's important to hold any researcher accountable, as to making sure that there is an ethical standard that they're willing to withhold. And that can mean removing specific records, that could mean imputing information, and we are always open to discussing, frameworks that we can stay and use evidence to not completely nullify, the value of that information, but to make sure that is helpful information and not skewed.
We get it. We're all stoners at the end of the day. But, when we ask a survey question of, how old you are and you say 420, it's not going to give, it's not going to help us with the analysis. So, it's just kind of, we get it, but we still have to make sure that we're taking the precautions to to actually report data effectively.
And there are just known things too that are automated where you go through the data set and you clean it. It's called data cleaning, and it's one of the first steps that we go through. So, and we do get trolls. That's just the price. Yeah. That's the price of the exposure and getting of the community. Right. There's trolls in the community. It's not that many people though.
Very positive overall. Okay, I think moving on, I think we can talk about the power of volunteerism, especially with real-world data and collecting real-world data and attending events like this. And I want to start with Ayako and Marné and Tyler too about any challenges of attending events like this in person, collecting real-world data, showing up, volunteering your time, sometimes not, but you know, what is that like, and how would you encourage other people to participate in it?
I mean, volunteering, I think, comes with really being interested in the community itself, right? So, I mean, it's not like I am not familiar with the work that both you and Miyabi both do, right? In terms of education and information and being able to participate in courses that you're offering to find, like I said before, you know, representation with each other, and seeing each other kind of, you know, in that space, and being like, oh, well, there are more people like me that are doing this. And there are people that really want this information and want to see it expanded upon, right? To kind of merge passions and everything else like that. In terms of volunteerism, it's definitely about, you know, time. Figuring out time to not only meet with each other and figure out, you know, next steps and priorities and things like that, but time for, you know, what we're all individually doing for on our own. And I'm grateful to be a local here in Vegas, so it makes things a little bit easier for me, at least for, you know, MJ Biz and everything. But I mean, I'm also happy to help support, right, the group and being a local here and being able to provide, you know, opportunities and things like that that might have been harder, you know, trying to get printing done, other things like that. So
I mean, I'll take it just another perspective on that too. It's because volunteering for research specifically in a clinical setting, like, sure, you're getting compensated to a certain extent in most of those clinical studies, but you're still volunteering, and it's like you're going out of your way to participate in that. Where, again, the beauty of what we're doing, and specifically what you two did in your study, is remote, decentralized, and at-home settings. So everything we're doing is done via text messages. You select the time of day that you can participate. We work together to make sure the questions take 1 to 2 minutes to answer. So when you talk about fitting it into your schedule and time and whatnot, it's meeting people a little more where they're at while still keeping the structure on it, so you can have some validity coming out of it. That I think is just an opportunity, speaking back to like the opportunity for real world data and real world evidence, is meeting people a little more where they're at, meeting participants or interested volunteers in research, citizen science, where they're at, so you can allow them to more easily participate where they don't have to go out of their way too much. They're answering questions on their phone based on a time that they said works or is convenient for them to answer these questions, and that's all you're asking out of them. So it's making it a little more simple to collect that feedback. So opening up the access or the funnel in regards to who might even be interested in hearing about this, let alone participating in it.
And ultimately for us, it's about giving back that information, and we're really excited. We can talk about this. We're really excited that I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah,
so we're really excited that you know, we did this longitudinal study. It was a 2-week study, and we were able to actually publish some of the early results and get it out there. We've been talking about it all year, and this is some of what we've been sharing with you here today. And soon, what we're going to be able to offer, in addition to that, is that people are going to be able to get a snapshot of their use over that time. So it will be it's going to be a similar protocol. And then what we'll be able to show is, like, so for example, the most useful thing for me was to be able to actually look at my exact one. Well, I analyzed the first person to decide if it was me or you. And it took me a while to figure it out, actually. It took me I thought I'd be able to do it off the rip, but we're actually more similar in consumption than I thought. It was like, we're both highly variable, actually, which is interesting. It seems like there is a high amount of variability just in general, day to day. People who daily consume, we daily consume different amounts every day, and that wasn't that's something that's not known but should be understood. Like how do we know so much about our own limits and that we set all of these own very daily specific things? How can we take that information and help move it forward so that other people can find what works for them faster, and so that we can understand what's working for us better, so that we can continue to optimize our schedules and our dosings
and the different product types. We're always saying cannabis is a personalized medicine, and it is. But if we can lower that barrier for people and say 80% of people like you responded well to this dose of this type of product, that's already going to make people feel so much more comfortable in trying that and knowing that there's research with people like them and that they can already resonate in that way. And it's not just cannabis we need to get data and research for, specifically with complex natural products where we haven't even characterized every molecule in these extracts. People are taking them all around the world every single day.
People.
We have a study going on right now with kava and kratom. It's an amazing product, but we have very, very little real world data on it. And you can participate in this right now, right outside here. We can sign you up, as well as some other research projects too. Another one involves THCV, and it's helping you reduce the psychoactive effects if you feel like you've over-medicated. That is huge if we can collect data on that for advocacy purposes to show that we have an Uno reverse card. If someone's too high and we need to get them a little bit lower, it'd be amazing to have data behind this and say, look, we do have a product type in 70% of people it helps. That's just a theoretical number, but this is how we're using data as advocacy to push forward. We're doing data on very specific product types, but it goes so much further than that product. Our industry is evolving, and these product types, we need to have open communication and open research with the community so we know when new products exist and people know to use them and partake in research if they can.
As
I
of
think-
right now, sorry.
I was just going to say two things to piggyback off of that. One, to your point, one of my most interesting things from the data set was, I think you said 62% early.
64%.
64%. So just the THCV study is interesting, just to go down that rabbit hole for a second. If you have 64% of a couple thousand people taking what you could assume is a regular dose or maybe even a high dose in the morning, and then having to step into work or something like that, having something that could maybe help regulate you or steady you before that would just be really interesting. If there is a compound of the plant that you're consuming for your medical purposes in the morning that can help just make sure your level tone on a consistent basis or an emergency situation. So that's really interesting. But to the other point I wanted to say with real world data, going back to what we were talking about earlier, your point on innovation in cannabis specifically, just because of the conference that we're at, the innovation on the products coming out is crazy. Like it's like every other week there's either a new cannabinoid or a new product type or a new administration form that's coming out. Like I think it was a year ago, THCV was the crazy buzz that everyone was trying to figure out what the deal was. And the year before that, CBN came up and everyone was like, oh my God, CBN. And then it was CBG. So it's just all the time, new cannabinoids are coming to fruition. They're being more easily able to produce at high volumes, or product types are changing. And traditional science just can't keep up with that innovation. So the only way to do that is to structure and organize the crowd that's already using it, citizen science, and put it in a way that you can collect real world data to put into real world evidence, just to give some info back to these people who are really buying these products as guinea pigs at the end of the day. When these new cannabinoids or product types come out, if you're one of the first people rushing to the dispensary to buy them, you're kind of like, yeah, I'm going to check out this and see what happens. And there's nothing out there. So I think that's just another interesting thing, that when you can activate the community and normalize that, you can get really quick insights to keep up with the innovation that's happening.
Yeah, I have to say on the THCV, I'll do one last thing on it. The only difference between Delta 9 THC and Delta 9 THCV is 2 carbons. So there's only 2 carbons just chopped right off there at the end. If you imagine, you've all probably seen the molecule THC. It's a bunch of rings with a long tail. And THCV has just got that tail shortened, just like give me a dog that has a dog tail, shoot. Why can't
Australian Shepherd.
Australian Shepherd, just like an Australian Shepherd. Now like a bunch of Rotties. Okay, so just whatever, just like a dog tail, THCV just has a shorter fatty tail than Delta 9 THC. Now, in theory, we know that interacts with the receptor differently. And in theory, we know that maybe even we can characterize biochemically how that affects the receptor. But in reality, it matters how it makes us feel. Absolutely. At the end of and I love Durban. have always been a real, and I love OVM, which is a newer, and I love THCV. And I think that there's also more to understand in the ratios of these to one another. So this is just kind of at the beginning of scratching the surface of things that we all kind of have been experimenting already in ourselves, but now it's coming out. And that's what this panel and that's what the real world data focus.
You're so right, because we characterize THCV as acting the opposite way as THC. Well, what if you have caffeine in your body? What if you have nicotine in your body? What if you didn't eat that day? You know, we need to have that humanistic component of research to get real world data. And we're going to wrap up this panel because the time is up, but we will be chit-chatting with everyone back there, and then please partake in some of our research that you can sign up for at the tables right back here. But I want to thank everyone on this panel. You guys were all amazing. Thank you for sharing your expertise.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.